They do put us in a dangerous position. They'll be shut down.
At 6:19 a.m., roughly 140 miles north of the Venezuelan shoreline, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. was navigating placid waters when its radar suddenly registered two Venezuelan jets. These weren't standard airplanes, they were high-speed fighters flying extremely close to the surface. And they neither transmitted an IFF, identify friend or foe, signal nor established communication over the radio. Instead, the pair of Venezuelan K-8s executed a sharp turn across the forward path of the carrier strike group, their engines roaring as though conducting an assault drill rather than a routine reconnaissance flight. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, CIC, warning lights flashed and crew members spun around. The supporting destroyers and cruisers adjusted their positions. Defensive readiness was heightened, and the American personnel understood they were being tested. This was clearly not an innocent flyby. From the U.S. viewpoint, this maneuver appeared to be a calculated provocation, a secretive demonstration of presence, sending a message that Venezuelan military aircraft could approach one of the planet's most formidable warships without prior warning. Crucially, no one aboard the Ford had any awareness that this would be merely the precursor to a much riskier sequence of events. No one expected the ensuing action, when the genuine descent toward the formation would compel all eyes toward the heavens and every hand toward their weapons. To keep informed about military intelligence, strategic conflicts, and the clandestine actions that reshape global power, make sure to hit the subscribe button for the Military Power channel. As the narrative is only just unfolding, the deployment of the USS Gerald R. to the region supervised by the U.S. Southern Command delivered an unambiguous message. On November 11, 2025, the carrier group, carrying over 4,000 sailors and numerous tactical aircraft prepared for day or night launch, entered the area. For Washington, this was more than a typical patrol, it was part of a larger strategy to assert dominance, prevent illegal activities, and bolster stability across the area. Simultaneously, the government in Caracas has grown progressively comfortable operating in what defense experts term the gray zone, those ambiguous areas between conflict and peace where nations challenge each other without initiating an all-out war. For the Venezuelan government, dispatching rapid jets near a U.S. strike group offers an opportunity to display determination, secure a brief media spotlight, and gauge the American response, all without engaging a missile. To grasp the seriousness of the situation, consider the Ford's significance. As the prototype of its line, the Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier is equipped with advanced systems, including a sophisticated radar suite, an electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, to power future weaponry, and the capacity to sustain dozens of aerial missions daily. In short, for the United States, it represents the physical embodiment of naval superiority, forward deployment, power projection, and global sea control. Conversely, the Venezuelan aircraft involved, a K-8W trainer attack jet, is far less formidable, designed for training, with slower speeds and older technology compared to modern fighters. The K-8W is not built for sophisticated engagements. Instead, it is well suited for the kind of daring, close-quarters maneuvers that garner attention. The disparity couldn't be starker. On one side, a floating stronghold brimming with advanced capabilities; on the other, a regional power ready to flirt with danger to make a statement. The choice of the early morning for this confrontation was intentional. Timing was crucial. A pre-dawn sortie means fewer civilian or commercial planes airborne, less radar interference, and better odds of capturing striking imagery for both U.S. tracking systems and Venezuelan state media. With the light of dawn intensifying, filming, photography, and uploading content become simpler. This aids Caracas in amplifying its story. We challenged the supercarrier and kept our composure. Meanwhile, from the U.S. perspective, the quiet dawn meant that any unexpected contact raised the alarm more rapidly and forced all systems into maximum readiness. As the carrier group steamed north of Venezuela, the initial two Venezuelan jets had already come close, sweeping across the group's front at extremely low altitude and with no radio communication. From the American viewpoint, this was a probing action, evaluating the reaction of the Ford's escort vessels, assessing response times, and perhaps identifying any blind spots. But just as the attention in the Combat Information Center was beginning to stabilize, the unexpected occurred. Radar detected 2 additional contacts inbound, closing rapidly from a distinct angle. In that instant, the situation escalated from merely unusual to critically urgent, and neither party seemed completely prepared for the sequence of events that would follow. By the time the second pair of contacts materialized on the radar, approximately at bearing 217 degrees, the tranquility of the Caribbean morning had already given way to significant strain. The initial 2 Venezuelan K-8W jets had completed their cutting maneuver over the strike group's bow. However, for the crews of the USS Gerald R. Ford and its supporting vessels, that felt like a trial run. Now, with 2 more high-speed targets converging from a new direction, Washington's most advanced carrier strike group found itself facing not just a provocation but a potential escalation. Within minutes, the Ford's command directed the launch of a pair of FA-18E Super Hornet fighters from the flight deck. This measure was no longer routine. It signaled that the United States was ready to counter should the situation cross a critical line. Concurrently, the escort destroyers and cruisers adjusted their positions, tightening the protective perimeter around the aircraft carrier. The deployment of these aircraft and the repositioning of the escort vessels underscored a pivotal moment. The Americans were treating the event as more than an aviation nuisance. They viewed it as a security incident with profound strategic implications. What made the moment even more revealing was what the infrared sensors detected. Despite their audacious maneuvers, the 4 Venezuelan jets carried no weapons on their external pylons. The evidence indicated not a strike mission but a deliberate display of force by flying close, fast, unannounced, and unarmed. The Venezuelan side appeared focused on creating a spectacle that could be broadcast, interpreted, and politically exploited. From the U.S. perspective, this was a quintessential gray zone action, aggressive but remaining beneath the threshold of open hostilities. Nevertheless, the Americans did not treat it lightly. The Hornets ascended rapidly, radar locked on, and defensive measures were fully engaged. The Ford maintained its course steadily. Radio silence was preserved except for necessary safety communications, and the carrier's crew remained vigilant on the horizon. What the U.S. notably did not do, however, was attempt to shoot down or electronically jam the Venezuelan aircraft. That restraint was itself a calculated decision, an intentional demonstration that superior capability does not always necessitate a kinetic response. Just as the situation appeared contained, a surprise unfolded. One of the 4 Venezuelan jets separated from the group, descending to an exceptionally low altitude. It executed a bold inverted dive directly toward the formation. From the bridge's vantage point, the mega carrier and its escorts looked up as this solitary contrail sliced across the sky, shrieking toward the bow of a U.S. destroyer. The combination of trajectory, speed, and altitude triggered unsafe maneuvering alarms within the Ford's Combat Information Center. For a brief moment, the entire carrier strike group seemed to hold its collective breath. The dive was not an attack in the conventional sense. No missiles were launched, and no target was designated for weapon release. Yet the sheer audacity was undeniable. In that instantaneous sequence, the Venezuelan pilot had compressed all the danger of war into a single breathtaking stunt. The U.S. response, once again, remained disciplined. The Hornets shadowed the rogue jet. The escort vessels tracked its path, and the carrier maintained zero deviation from its original heading. Crucially, no defensive fire was initiated, thus preserving the risk-averse threshold the U.S. sought to project. What transpired next transcended individual aircraft and entered a broader theater of presence and projection. As the Venezuelan jets began to pull away, something on the Ford's radar shifted. For a few seconds, a targeting radar paint from one of the Venezuelan contacts briefly appeared on the carrier group. That fleeting electronic lock-on may not have signified a missile launch, but in naval air warfare, it often serves as the digital equivalent of a firearm being readied. The U.S. crew absorbed the message: "You're visible. You're trackable. You're under observation." Yet, the U.S. also transmitted its counter-message: "We do not react impulsively. We respond with deliberate control." When the tension of the incident subsided, the Venezuelan jets departed the area, silent and unarmed, leaving behind a formation of ships and aircraft that had held its course. From the American perspective, this was neither a defeat nor a direct combat victory. It was a demonstration of resolve and discipline. The Ford's capacity to endure an audacious low-altitude dive, maintain course, keep its escorts ready, and launch interceptors without escalating into full combat illustrated a strategic advantage that goes beyond the tactical. In essence, the Ford jet closure played out less like an aerial dogfight and more like a well-rehearsed intelligence gathering or signaling exercise. For Caracas, it was a risky theatrical display. For Washington, it was an exercise in composure under duress. The U.S. warship had successfully navigated the test, not by firing first, but by staying its course and allowing its capability to speak for itself. The morning calm was abruptly broken, as the 4 Venezuelan jets converged on the USS Gerald R. Ford strike group. One of them split from the formation and executed a maneuver that seemed born of a pilot's personal recklessness rather than standard protocol. Plunging from above 2.000 feet to less than 1.000 feet in mere seconds, the jet flipped upside down and plummeted directly toward the bow of a U.S. destroyer escorting the carrier. Everything on the bridge intensified. Radar screens illuminated, alarms sounded, and computers flagged an unsafe maneuver as the aircraft streaked past so closely that the crew could almost count the rivets on the destroyer's hull. In response, the Ford's close-in weapon systems, CIWS, instantly shifted into automatic tracking mode. Their sensors fixated on the rapidly approaching jet. This was not a practice drill. The high-velocity, water-cooled rotary cannon was moments away from transitioning to a warning shoot-down state, moving from monitoring to engaged readiness. Meanwhile, the 2 launched FA-18E Super Hornets climbed quickly to intercept altitude. However, established protocols governed the situation. The Hornet pilots did not activate their radar lock onto the intruding Venezuelan aircraft. They maintained a defensive stance, clearly defined by U.S. rules of engagement to prevent a provocative act from spiraling into full-blown combat. Even prior to the dive, U.S. infrared sensors had confirmed that all 4 Venezuelan jets lacked live ammunition on their hardpoints. This detail was significant. In the unspoken realm of naval aviation, an unarmed flight at close proximity is not a strike, it is a message. It signaled that the Venezuelan mission was intended not to destroy but to provoke and assess. By executing a high-speed dive at an extremely low altitude, roughly between 600 and 800 feet, the jet achieved 3 objectives simultaneously. It compelled a reaction, generated dramatic visuals, and signaled the Venezuelan pilots' willingness to violate legal and safety boundaries without discharging a weapon. From the U.S. perspective, that dive was far more than a stunt, it was a calculated act of pressure. The combination of timing, altitude, and proximity to the target was textbook for an unsafe maneuver, a term used by naval analysts to describe any flight path that intentionally risks collision or forces a defensive response without crossing the line into an armed attack. The carrier group maintained its course. The escorts held their formation. The Hornets shadowed, but the dive delivered an unmistakable message. Your presence will not deter us. You must react, or your deterrence is compromised. And yet, what surprised the Ford's crew most was not the dive itself. Within seconds of the jet pulling out and moving away, U.S. radar systems detected a brief electronic lock-on, a targeting paint, from one of the Venezuelan aircraft. The gravity of this was immediate. Although no missile was launched, the act of electronically acquiring a target is the maritime equivalent of pulling a trigger. It signifies, you have been marked. A message had been successfully delivered, and the U.S. recognized it for what it was: a singular moment of electronic signaling layered on top of a highly aggressive maneuver. In that critical instant, the strike group found itself in a hybrid environment, part aerial provocation, part electronic warfare, and part media spectacle. The Venezuelan jet that completed the dive departed the formation but had accomplished its goal. It had forced a tracking response, activated defensive systems, and created data that could be leveraged by Caracas as proof of their boldness. The carrier group did not open fire. It did not swerve. It did not escalate. Instead, it maintained its posture and continued its mission. That calmness, which on the surface might appear passive, was in fact active power projection. the capability to absorb provocation without compromising strategic integrity. For the U.S., the lesson was clear: capability alone is insufficient. In contemporary sea control warfare, restraint amplifies strength. By avoiding a full engagement, by resisting the urge to fire first, the Ford Group effectively imposed its own rules of engagement on the scenario. It reacted not out of fear but responded out of principle. Meanwhile, for the Venezuelan pilots, their dive represented the climax of a calculated test. They had pushed the limits, invited a response, yet remained just below the threshold of war. The risk was substantial, but so was the reward: temporary dominance of the narrative, footage to support national pride, and a rehearsal for future escalation. As the carriers and jets transitioned into the remainder of the morning's patrol, the dive faded into routine air traffic. But its effect lingered, not in the sound of bullets, but in the hum of tracking radars, the quiet processing of surveillance data, and the images that would circulate through both military intelligence channels and media outlets. The engagement was won not by force but by control. And often, in contested zones like the southern Caribbean, control matters more than firepower. The moment the 4 Venezuelan jets began to move away from the main strike group, the crews aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford strike group were already assessing multiple levels of threat. But what ensued transitioned the encounter from straightforward aviation drama into full-blown hybrid warfare. In the seconds following the audacious low-altitude dive, radar operators on the Ford registered a sudden paint signal, a radar lock-on originating from one of the Venezuelan aircraft. Although no missile was launched, the act itself triggered one of the most severe alerts in a carrier's combat information center. Electronic target paint is not merely technical terminology. It means the adversary's sensors have identified you, tracked you, and potentially prepared for engagement, all without firing a shot. In this specific instance, the Ford's radar registered the Venezuelan jet's tracking beam aimed directly at the U.S. formation for a fleeting 1 to 2 seconds. Suddenly, the operational environment changed. It was no longer solely about aggressive aerial maneuvers but about the digital signature of a threat. The carrier group's CIWS and escort vessels logged the signal as a step beyond standard provocation. It was a subtle but unmistakable message, indicating that the Venezuelan aircraft possessed the ability to lock onto the carrier group and could choose to act if it desired. And this kind of so-called gray zone signaling, aggressive but remaining below the threshold of a direct attack, is becoming a key element of modern naval operations. Nations like Venezuela utilize these signals to test reactions, compel documentation of their behavior, and shift the narrative to their advantage. The media later reported on the broader U.S. task force deployment and pressure campaign in the Caribbean. In fact, according to the Associated Press, the Ford's deployment was part of a regional surge and was characterized as the largest buildup of U.S. firepower in generations near Venezuela. The radar lock-on, therefore, was interpreted as a deliberate component of that pressure strategy, not just a pilot's stunt. Yet, the U.S. reaction offered its own message. The Ford maintained its course, upheld its original speed, and did not alter its heading. The Hornets and escort ships remained in their established defensive posture, neither escalating nor retreating. That steadfastness was itself a choice. In strategic terms, by refusing to deviate, the U.S. sent a clear signal: we are not surprised. We are not intimidated, and we will not allow ourselves to be lured into a trap. The fact that the carrier did not divert or launch weapons, despite enduring the electronic signal, demonstrates that control, not impulse, is the modern measure of strength. The carrier's composure contrasted sharply with the confrontational nature of the Venezuelan move. The dive exhibited audacity, the lock-on displayed intent. Taken together, they revealed a two-step strategy. First, the spectacle to capture attention and force a reaction. Second, the digital engagement to test thresholds. And although no weapon was discharged, the intelligence gathering was successful. The U.S. formation revealed its positions, reaction times, and rules of engagement, all valuable intelligence for future confrontations. However, the story did not conclude with the jets' departure. As they vanished over the horizon, the battle shifted its medium from radar beams and warships to headlines and state television footage. Venezuelan state media quickly claimed that the U.S. carrier had been forced to retreat, even though naval and ice data clearly showed the Ford held its course. The contrast suggested that the true victor in that moment was not the force that fired but the one that controlled the narrative. From the U.S. side, this event serves as a rehearsal in modern maritime encounters. The ability to absorb a provocative dive, register a targeting signal, maintain formation, and respond only when necessary, all while preserving freedom of action, speaks to the evolving character of power at sea. The deployment of the Ford itself was already a significant escalation in the region. Reports described more than a dozen U.S. Navy ships, in addition to the carrier, moving into the Caribbean in a campaign the Pentagon labeled Operation Southern Warfare. Warfare today is not solely about bullets and missiles, it's about who sees whom first. It's about who records the moment. It's about control of the skies, control of the seas, and control of the story. When one side dives low and the other holds its course, the outcome is less about physical damage inflicted and more about power defined. As the Venezuelan jets disappeared into the distance and the U.S. carrier strike group stabilized its course, the quiet hum of the ocean did not signify the end of the event. What followed transitioned into a different arena, a battle of narratives. In Caracas, state television immediately broadcast a headline that resonated across Latin America and into Washington. The USS Gerald R. Ford had been compelled to withdraw from the region. The news anchor claimed that the powerful U.S. supercarrier, confronted by aggressive Venezuelan maneuvers, had retreated under pressure. Yet, the data presented a different reality. Automatic Identification System, ICE, signals, published U.S. Navy movements, and open-source tracking confirmed the carrier maintained its heading and speed without deviation. According to Reuters, the Ford's deployment in the region was a clear escalation of American naval presence. The U.S. Navy itself characterized the incident not as a combat defeat but rather as a calculated show of force operation intended to deter, not engage. Essentially, Venezuela's media narrative aimed at constructing a symbolic victory. By broadcasting that the Ford had pulled back, Caracas sought to boost national pride, claim strength against U.S. dominance, and signal to a domestic audience that the government remained defiant. On the other side, the United States demonstrated that it did not need to fire a weapon or turn away to assert power. The Roman principle of displaying strength without striking played out in real time across the silent waves of the Caribbean. Behind the scenes, the U.S. military buildup off Venezuela's coast was already drawing significant attention. Analysts described the Ford's arrival as the largest American military buildup in the Caribbean in decades. The stated objective, according to the Pentagon, was to disrupt narcotics trafficking and degrade transnational criminal organizations in the region. Despite the counter-smuggling rhetoric, Venezuela's government perceived the presence as a step toward regime pressure. This alignment between the strategic message and the tactical posture shaped how both parties responded after the jets had departed. From the U.S. standpoint, the carrier's steady course symbolized discipline under provocation. Naval power doctrine often stresses that the most significant act of strength is to maintain the mission when threatened, not to abandon it. By refusing to alter course, the Ford's strike group sent a silent message. They would not be pushed off station by aerial theatrics. The underlying calculation was that a carrier's value resides not only in its weapons but in its presence. Simultaneously, by avoiding escalation, no missiles fired, no major course corrections made, the United States prevented a full-blown crisis or the risk of miscalculation. The event became a lesson in control rather than combat. The Ford's ability to absorb the dive, track the jets, launch interceptors, and then continue on its way unharmed exemplified the modern measure of naval dominance, resilience under pressure. For Venezuela, the ruse of forcing a U.S. retreat served multiple purposes. First, it reinvigorated domestic messaging for Nicolas Maduro's government during a period of economic difficulty and political isolation. Second, it allowed Caracas to present itself as an actor capable of standing up to the world's largest military power. And third, by eliciting a reaction from the U.S., specifically the carrier's composed posture and the subsequent media coverage, Venezuela effectively rewrote the incident as a symbolic win. However, beneath the surface, The real contest was not who fired first but who controlled the aftermath. Once the jets were gone, the carrier group returned to routine operations, and the Ford's course remained unchanged. Meanwhile, Venezuela saturated its state media with claims of American retreat and victory. It was a stark reminder that in the era of gray zone warfare, the weaponized medium is often the narrative itself. And yet, the fundamental question persists. Why did Venezuela accept the risk in the first place? By sending a small fleet of older K-8s to challenge a carrier strike group. They invited scrutiny, tracked response times, and generated data for analysis. They risked miscalculation because the potential reward, winning the story, was deemed higher than the cost of escalation. Ultimately, when the sound of the engines faded and the horizon returned to its normal quiet line, what remained was not the dive, the lock-on, or even the media battle. It was the intention behind it all. For Venezuela, the goal was never to destroy a U.S. carrier, it was to capture a moment. By propelling older K-8 aircraft into the path of the world's most advanced strike group, Caracas created footage that could be endlessly replayed, celebrated, and framed as proof of defiance. State outlets later portrayed the encounter as a sign that their pilots were ready to face a superpower. This aligned with a recurring pattern noted by Reuters, which reported in November 2025 that Venezuela frequently uses military theatrics to reinforce the image of national resistance during times of political pressure. Yet, the American response revealed something far more enduring. The USS Gerald R. Ford held its course. The escort ships maintained formation, and the U.S. Navy opted for discipline over escalation, demonstrating that strength is measured not only by capability but by control. The carrier's advanced radar, defensive range, and air-wing readiness, widely documented by the U.S. Navy's public affairs releases, showed a force that did not need to react loudly to prove its superiority. The incident became a clear contrast between symbolic power and real operational dominance. As the strike group continued its mission, a question lingered over the water. If you were the commander on the bridge of the USS Ford that morning, would you have held course as the U.S. Navy did, or taken a more forceful approach? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more deep dives into the military events shaping our world today.